Hello, Magic players and collectors. Welcome back to the Land Library. I'm your librarian, and in this episode of Legendary Locations, we're on Dominaria once again to discuss one of the biggest names in all of lands, Tolarian Academy, along with, of course, Tolaria as a whole. Tolaria is a large tropical island in a chain of islands in kind of just the middle of the ocean, right around here. For most of history, it was actually pretty avoided because it's an island, so it's only really accessible by sailors, and it was home to a bunch of like shapeshifters, fairies, and sentient illusions, as well as surrounded by misty coral reefs populated with sea serpents. You know, all of the things sailors want to avoid. Sailors would tell stories of this island of misty illusions, and that people who ventured on the island would come back with missing memories, altered personalities, aged many years in just hours, or disappear for months with no awareness of how long they were gone. Its reputation, along with the difficulty of reaching it to begin with, means nobody really went there after the first few times people tried, so over the years it became more of a fantasy. Its location was forgotten, and people stopped even thinking it was real, thinking instead that it was just an old myth sailors told to pass the time. This reputation of being a literal myth is what made it perfect for Urza, who was looking for a secluded place to build a secret laboratory and school. Contacting another powerful mage named Baron, the two founded and built the Tolarian Academy in 3285 AR. The primary purpose of the academy was not just teaching magic, though, it was to prepare the plane for the Phyrexian threat, and trained many powerful mages and planeswalkers like Giora, who I previously have mentioned in the Shiv episode. Well, Giora became extremely pivotal when she was killed in 3307 AR by a Phyrexian infiltrating the Academy. Her death hit pretty hard for a lot of the people at the Academy, so in an attempt to save her, Urza created a time machine and sent Karn through it. Karn did successfully save Giora, but the time machine also kind of backfired, blowing up and destroying the Academy, forcing everyone who survived, which was not very many, it was something like 16 people, to flee. And it also caused massive damage to space-time and opened up a bunch of rifts. In true time travel circuity, these temporal rifts were the exact thing that thousands of years ago caused sailors to, quickly age or go missing, giving the island its reputation to begin with. And due to time travel nonsense, Giora was no longer dead, but the Academy and everyone from it was gone, so she was just kind of there by herself, stranded. She survived alone among the rifts for around 10 years before anyone came back, and spending all that time with the time-altering rifts basically stopped her aging, making her practically immortal. Then finally, Urza and the rest of the teachers, like Byron, returned to Tolaria to rebuild, with a batch of new students. The rebuilt academy lasted much longer this time, and over the years, the academy produced many notable magical advancements, like the Weatherlight airship and Black Lotuses, becoming quite renowned across the plane and getting a lot more students all the way up until 4205 AR, when the Phyrexians invaded. One of their prime targets was Tolaria, pretty reasonably, and they attacked while Urza and Barin were both away. Barin returned to Tolaria to bury his daughter, who had died in a different fight fighting the Phyrexians, only to discover that the Phyrexians had completely overwhelmed Tolaria. So, in an attempt to keep the hundreds of years of valuable research out of the Phyrexians' hands, he destroyed the island and everything on it in a giant blast, which did also include himself, and sunk the whole island to the bottom of the sea. And although this is the end for the island Tolaria, Tolarian Academy was rebuilt once again after the invasion on a new island that was named Tolaria West in homage to the original academy. And with the Phyrexian threat dealt with, at least they thought it was, the new Phyrexians came back, but that was a lot later. Tolaria West was now just a general school of magic. I do also need to talk about the tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. I wasn't sure where exactly to put it on the timeline because its lore is a bit mysterious. It starts sometime before negative 5000 AR, when a planeswalker named Terrant Amiz created the Cat Warriors to protect the jungles of Jumara, and had them build the tabernacle as a place to worship him as one of their first acts. There isn't a specific time for this, but the Cat Warriors do date back to around the time of the Thran Empire, which fell in negative 5000 AR, which is where I'm getting the before that. Tarrant would later disappear, and the tabernacle was abandoned as the tribes of cat warriors scattered. Thousands of years later, around positive 3000 AR, the tabernacle was rediscovered by a cat warrior named Jedit Ojanen, who then brokered a deal with the elves that controlled the area for access to it. But at some point after this, at an unknown time for unknown reasons and by an unknown method, the tabernacle disappeared from Jumara and showed up on Tolaria in the Pendrell Vale. It seemingly was completely ignored by the Academy because Pendrell was an especially misty and hard to traverse area, and the tabernacle emitted a strange magical aura that made summoning creatures extremely mana intensive, so they didn't really want to go there. However, there were still disciples of the tabernacle on the island, though their influence and interactions with the Academy are unknown. Finally, the tabernacle possibly survived the destruction of the island, as its magical energies persist even to the current point on the timeline. We've got a few legendaries this time around: Tolaria, Tolarian Academy, Academy Ruins, and the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. Tolaria is from Legends and can tap for a blue mana, or during upkeep can tap to remove banding and bands with abilities from a target creature until end of turn. And while it's not on the reserved list, it's never been printed in any form. Tolarian Academy is from Urza's Saga and can tap to add blue mana equal to the number of artifacts you control. This one is on the reserved list, so also has only the one print, although it has gotten a digital reprint and a vintage championship print, which is an oversized card that was given out to winners of a tournament, and it does have different art, which is pretty cool. Academy Ruins is originally from Time Spiral and taps for a colorless or for a generic and a blue. It taps to put a target artifact from your graveyard on top of your library. This one has gotten several reprints, mostly of the same art, but it did get a different art in Aetherdrift Commander, which is pretty nice, and a borderless art in Double Masters, along with a Secret Lair reskin. Then there's the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which is also from Legends, and gives all creatures an upkeep cost of 1. This is on the reserved list as well, so only has the one print, but similarly to Tolarian Academy, it has gotten a digital version, but it's actually gotten two different digital versions, including a different art, along with an oversized card with a different art as well. Now for some creatures, we've got Sandbar Serpent, Tolarian Terror, Baron Master Wizard, Baron Tolarian Archmage, Urza High Artificer, Karn Silver Golem, Giora of the Gitu, Rain Academy Chancellor, Academy Researchers, Horseshoe Crab, Morphling, Pendrell Drake, Stern Proctor, Tolarian Drake, Tolarian Entrancer, Tolarian Sentinel, Wizard Mentor, and Magus of the Tabernacle. Then, while related to the lore of the Tabernacle, Jedit Ojanen, who does have a couple of cards, but he's never actually on Tolaria, so I'm bringing him up, but not counting his cards. For spells, there's Obliterate, Karn's Temporal Sundering, Tinker, Rebuild, Show and Tell, Scent of Brine, and Tolarian Winds. For enchantments, there's Lingering Mirage, Auraflux, Arcane Laboratory, Cloak of Mists, Mental Discipline, Confiscate, Pendrell Flux, Slow Motion, and Temporal Distortion. And then for artifacts, Black Lotus, Lotus Blossom, Baron's Codex, Memory Jar, Temporal Aperture, and Skyship Weatherlight. And for lands, there's Lotus Vale, Fairy Conclave, Idyllic Beachfront, and Remote Isle. But there's also Tolaria West and Memorial to Genius, then a plain card called Academy at Tolaria West, all representing Tolaria West, which isn't exactly on the island, but definitely deserve to mention, and I'll count them as extras. So that's a total of 19 creatures, 7 spells, 9 enchantments, 6 artifacts, and 7 lands, plus the 3 extras, for a grand total of 48 cards, or 51 with the extras. There's 4 lands to talk about this time, and all of them have quite the history. 2 of them are even from Legends, which was the set that added legendaries, so yeah, quite a history. Let's start with Tolaria. This land from Legends has not aged well, since it's a counter of an outdated mechanic. It made sense at the time of release, especially since there's a cycle of lands in the same set, Legends, that gives banding, and Tolaria can remove it. But banding is a scrapped mechanic, and nobody really still uses it, at least not frequently enough to bother running a counter unless you already know it's coming. Without the ability to remove banding, it's just a legendary that makes blue mana, which is better than colorless, but you might as well just use a basic island, because that also taps for a blue, but is much easier to search out or interact with, and isn't a legendary, so you can have more than one. Tolaria still has its place in the scenarios where you're playing against banding, like if someone in your commander group runs it, or if you're playing old school vintage, but it really only should be used if you know banding is gonna be in your opponent's deck. The other land from Legends, the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, has aged much better. Adding an upkeep cost to all creatures has never become obsolete and remains very powerful against creature-heavy decks. There certainly are ways around it, like land destruction, or decks that want to sacrifice lots of creatures anyway, but it pretty much gives the options of use all your mana keeping your creatures alive, or lose all your creatures so you can use your mana, which is brutal against most creature-based decks. This land is so powerful to the point that people kinda hate it and will hate you for using it, but it's a highly prized and expensive collector's card. The next one printed is the star of the episode, Tolarian Academy. This land is incredibly good. It can make a ton of mana really easily, like so easily that it's banned in most formats and restricted when it's not. Making multiple mana from a single tap is often quite restricted because of how impactful it can be, but Tolarian Academy has an almost arbitrary restriction that it cares about the number of artifacts. Artifacts are the easiest thing to cheese out huge numbers of, from zero cost artifacts, widely played mana rocks, artifact creatures, even some other lands are artifacts. It's not that hard to build a deck with mostly artifacts and still have it not just function but be good. And Tolarian Academy takes that even further. Artifact decks are already very powerful even without Tolarian Academy, which is why it being such powerful artifact support is bannable. If you ask a Magic player what the most powerful land ever printed is, odds are they'll tell you Tolarian Academy. And that just leaves Academy Ruins. This is another pretty good land, not quite on the same level, but it is still pretty good. It can get back artifacts that get destroyed or milled for fairly cheap, and still can tap for mana when you don't need to get your artifacts back. It's not as powerful of artifact support as Tolarian Academy, like it only makes colorless, and it only makes one, but it's actually kind of good that it's not as good, because it's not banned and it's the only one of these that actually gets reprints. This is basically a must-play card in any blue artifact decks, but it doesn't, like, define the deck like Tolarian Academy does. Tolaria is definitely a low-tier card for usability. I usually say at least having a niche is worth, like, D tier, but it doesn't really even have its own deck niche. It's dependent on your opponent's deck, which feels like maybe an F, but I'll be generous, since it's not that it's so bad at its intended purpose, it's just that that intended purpose is outdated, and I'll start it in D. But there's no way I can let it stay there. Tolaria is one of, if not the most legendary places in all of Magic lore. It was a literal in-universe legend before the most legendary man in the multiverse showed up and built some of the most legendary places in the multiverse on it. This bumps it up, honestly, like 2 tiers up to a B, but, I gotta slow down a little and put it at the bottom of B. Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale is just an S tier. It's often placed in the top 10 most powerful lands ever, which is obviously S tier usage, and its lore isn't quite on the same level as the Academy, or I guess the island they're on, but it's still pretty interesting, which keeps it in S. I think maybe above Aganjo, but not Beseiju. Saving the Academy for last, that means Academy Ruins is next. This one is very good and a commonly played card, and although it technically has a niche, it's like the biggest niche ever. It's a great utility land, and I'd say it's like an A tier, and its lore is basically just that it's there. Nothing happens at the ruins, it's just kind of piggybacking off of Tolarian Academy's previous history. And while it is still Tolarian Academy, it doesn't add anything else, so I think it just stays in A. And finally, Tolarian Academy. This is widely accepted as the best land ever printed, and one of the most legendary places in universe. Literally the most prime example of what makes a land card legendary. It's an easier S tier than Tabernacle was. In fact, S tier doesn't even feel like enough. I'm adding S plus, and I'm putting it in S+. If you've made it this far in the video, please drop a like for turn and subscribe for more Landfield content. If I missed anything, got anything wrong, or you just have questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next Legendary Locations with another Dominarian Island, Teferi's Isle.